This is MUSC 108, Music in the Marketplace, Week 1, Lecture 2. Hopefully you've had a chance between Tuesday and today to peruse and take notes on the articles and lectures on best learning practices. Today's conversation is some light fluff regarding career possibilities in the music industry. Just to give you a perception of what's out there. So many of you are music industry majors. If we were meeting in person, this would be a good chance for us to talk about what particular interests each of you had in the industry. But since we don't have that, we'll sort of do it this way. Again, for those folks that are outside of the industry, a lot of times the public perception of what careers are possible inside the industry are limited to just a short list of a few careers. Recording artist, recording engineer, producer, or somebody who owns a label. But there's a lot more job opportunities out there. Again, everything I say is going to be... We have to think about pre-COVID, where we are now, and then I guess sometimes try to infer about what the world is going to be like post-COVID. But prior to COVID, the U.S. Bureau of Statistics forecasted that overall employment in the music industry would grow slower than the general economy through 2022. The arts in general have taken a huge hit during COVID, but you have to be an optimist to work in the music business. So here we go. The border-crossing nature of the entertainment industry means some jobs have possible value in multiple industry sectors. So to provide some perspective, we can group them thusly: broadcasting, film and video game, concert venue and touring, creative work, directing and producing, entrepreneurs, instrument and equipment, music management / legal services, performing and teaching. So in the same way that at the beginning of the semester, after the first class or during the first lecture, I asked you after class to start reading and watching videos regarded to best study practices so that you can formulate a plan to chart your success for this semester. It's never a bad idea if you have specific goals, and some of you do. I've never taught one of these classes where there weren't pretty large number of folks that had specific things that they wanted to do in the industry, and there's never, if you're one of the people who wants to be in the industry but is unsure, there's always lots of those people too. So again, sometimes the direction will find you. Sometimes you can coax it. Figure out what your strengths and interests are and figure out ways to move towards your strengths and the things that you're really interested in. A lot of times the things we are really interested in are the things that we spend time on, so they become strengths. This is just, again, from one of the sort of standard textbooks. This is just a chart that I took out of one of these textbooks that have been sent to me over the years that just sort of talked about how to chart a direction. So here's an overview of some of the more common careers. In the creative field, of course, songwriters. In pop music, that's not necessarily the recording artist, but the songwriter. They can be the same person, but many songwriters they're not recording artists. They write songs for other people. Again, prolific output is often required. You have to write a ton of songs before you start to write good songs, and you're never sure what the market is going to bear. So again, if you have a ton of songs, not all of them are going to be hits, but you can build an entire career off of a few hit songs. Lyricist, again, a lot of times songwriters write in the modern music industry and dating back now really from the mid 1960s. A lot of songwriters write their own material, music and lyrics, but a lot of them don't. Again, probably in the pantheon of the last half century of pop music, probably maybe the most famous recording artist who writes the music but not the lyrics is Elton John, right? Um, Composer of show music. If you go to a Broadway show, or if you've ever been in your high school production of In the Heights, then somebody had to write that music, and that's a gig. That's a job. So, and for every Broadway or off-Broadway show, there's also regional theater, children's theater, industrial shows. Companies put on productions of original material. So all of those have to, if there's a musical component, there has to be music written for those shows. So that's a gig. Composer of production for music library. In the last generation, we've seen a rise in licensing possibilities for generic music. Music that is made to fit certain moods that you can interchange. So these libraries of production music have that you can lease or buy from these production libraries, and put them in. They're just music that you will, again, licensed for use in your production. People have to write that music. Educational materials. If you played in your high school, junior high school, or elementary school band, or know somebody who did, that music has to be written, so, or arranged. So that's the thing. At least, so qualifications in this field, again, usually this can be fairly complex stuff. Even though it's music for young people, it's usually fairly, especially when you get into high school and junior high school, it can be fairly complex literature. Usually folks who do this have a degree in music. Composer of children's music. If you've ever watched Sesame Street, I have a very good friend who is the musical director for Sesame Street. That's his gig, right? Blues Clues, any of these shows, I have a friend who's the composer, the head composer for, has been the composer for a number of children's, and has won multiple Emmys through his work. He had to write all the music for every episode. Well, that's a gig. Again, Disney was a pioneer in this field. Any of those movies that you grew up watching or aware of, or Disney still has a tremendous amount of content, all of that has to be written and arranged. So that's a gig. Composers of classical music. Believe it or not, it may not be your thing, but classical music to be heard, contemporary classical music, even though we think of going to the symphony and hearing music from hundreds of years ago, people like Beethoven and Mozart, people are still writing music like that, and some of them are getting paid. So it's, again, there's like a lot of the things that we're talking about here. There's tremendous competition. But like in any field, the best, or the people who, and again, sometimes what the best means is not always apparent, but people are still making money in all of these fields, whether or not you go into a particular field and will be successful. Again, it's anybody's guess, but there are some, again, if you work hard at it and you have direction, as per what we were talking about earlier in the slide presentation, the world, you can make there is, in the world of the music industry, there is room for you if you're willing to put in the work. Arranger orchestrator. An arranger orchestrator means a lot of things. If we're talking about music for schools, well, a lot of times, if your high school marching band plays a show, or your high school pep band, or the college pep band, or, right, these bands you tune into, like, well, when there used to be sports on television, college sports, you'd hear somebody's band at the basketball game. Well, they're playing an arrangement for a pep band of a pop tune, maybe Bruno Mars, whatever, something that multiple generations know and identify with, maybe something from a previous generation, maybe the Rolling Stones or whatever, but it's a pop tune that's been rewritten for trumpets and trombones and clarinets and drum set and bass, and so that they go out to so somebody has to do that. That's an arranger orchestrator. Other possibilities are, well, in the Broadway field, when there used to be Broadway, and there will not be Broadway again until sometime at least at the earliest 2021. But what has become popular in the last maybe 15 or so years has been what industry insiders call the jukebox musical, which means that you take songs, pop songs of a certain era or a certain composer, and you write some sort of plot around them, and you use the songs of a genre or a particular, like Billy Joel's "Moving Out," that was a huge hit on Broadway. Well, somebody had to take Billy Joel's songs and rewrite them and rearrange them for a Broadway pit orchestra and a vocalist or a series of vocalists. This is also the work of an arranger or orchestrator. Music editor. Again, somebody has to, all of this music has to be prepared and edited and copied. So music editor is somebody who basically just, again, it has to look right. Music notation exists for the express purposes of musicians being able to look at it, read it, and play it correctly. If it doesn't look right, you may or may not be able to read music, but I know that you can read English. If this PowerPoint presentation had a lot of typos on it, well, you might be able to get through it, but it would certainly slow you down trying to figure out, especially if they were really egregious typos. It would really slow you down. So that's why books have editors. That's why, again, I don't have an editor, so you might spot a misspelling or a spacing error or something. Probably not too many of them, but maybe because I don't have an editor. But music that goes for publication has editors because of what I said before. Especially if it's a commercial product, it needs to look right because you're in the marketplace. If you put out a product that musicians can't use and use well, then they're going to go to somebody else. There's just too much competition in any of these fields. So the music editor has to make sure it's all correct. There are no mistakes. The music copyist is the person, again, copy work used to be done by hand, and you used to have to go through an arduous process of learning how to write music in a very legible way. It's the same way that it used to be, again, before the printing press. People wrote out books by hand. Well, music copy work existed long past the printing press. There just wasn't a great way for a lot of music to be printed. So a lot of it, especially in the jazz, commercial, and Broadway fields, part of it was tradition, part of it the technology wasn't great. So the copyists were handwritten until probably like the 80s. There was still a tradition of copyists. Nowadays, it's all done by computers, you might imagine, and there are various programs that do this. A lot of them, again, in the last 5 years, we've seen an influx of great online or usable online platforms where you can make readable manuscript. Manuscript is a fancy word of saying music writing. Okay. So a music copyist, again, you have to be extremely musically literate, and you have to be a stickler for details, and you have to again, in this generation, how to be extremely computer literate on these different programs. In the field of directing, producing, again, if you've ever seen in person or on television or on YouTube or whatever, right? The conductor position in front of a symphony orchestra, an opera orchestra, a choir, Broadway shows have, right? If you've been to church, there is generally a choir conductor. The movie television media, like if there's music that has live musicians, somebody generally, again, somebody writes it, somebody edits it, somebody copies it. It's put in front of an orchestra on a sound stage somewhere, and somebody is the organizing figure that brings all those musicians together. That's the conductor. Okay? Again, these are most people in this field are highly literate musicians. Most have studied and have at least one, or if not multiple degrees in the field. Record producer, we will talk about this later in depth after we get through a lot of copyright and publishing and some of the basics of how money gets earned, because record producer can mean a lot of things. It's generally the organizing figure. I know that one of the things that probably some of you want to do is produce. I know that some of you are probably producing at least beats right now. But producing beats and producing a record are two different things. And again, it can go, so there are several different types of producers that we will discuss in some detail later in the semester. Probably the underlying organizing, the underlying skill set is that you have to see the big picture and how all the little pictures, you're basically an organizer in some fashion. So you have to have an eye for detail and a way to organize and inspire others to get to the end of a particular project. Performance careers, again, a lot of times, especially in the early parts of the 21st century, musicians do one of several things. But the two big ones that we recognize in the current music industry are singer and instrumentalist. And we will talk later in the semester when we talk about unions and who gets paid and how they get paid and why they get paid. We will recognize that singers and instrumentalists are classified differently. And they belong to different unions, and there are different stipulations on how and why and when they get paid. So, again, singer sort of goes without, we know what a singer is, but you can be a lead singer, you can be a featured singer, which means you're not necessarily the focal point, but you have a small solo, or you sing a duet with someone, or you can be part of a choir, backup singer, right? As an instrumentalist, the most common ones in the 21st century are keyboardists, guitarists, drummers. If you play, especially if you're in a Broadway pit, which I used to do a lot of back in the day, people who play saxophone will also play flute and clarinet. It's called being a doubler. So these are different. There are different qualifications, but again, these are generally highly literate musicians. Teaching careers, again, in the 21st century, musicians, especially, this is in the pre-COVID world. So again, for many, many years, I made my living as a musician in New York City. Now I teach and I play and I write, and I've done some production work, and I've done a lot of teaching outside of the university. Most musicians that I know do a lot of things to piece together their living. But years ago, I was able to make a comfortable living just as a player, and people still, in the pre-COVID world, a lot of people still do. Although again, over the years, it's shrunk. So most musicians also teach. There's studio teachers, somebody who teaches lessons, could be at a university or a local music store. Maybe somebody comes to your house to teach your little sister or brother piano lessons, right? College music instructor, right? Or school music educator, somebody who teaches high school, junior high school, elementary school, band or orchestra. Music therapist. Music therapy is an emerging field of study for a lot of musicians, as mental health becomes more and more of a focus in our society. People are realizing that music therapy can yield results for people who are experiencing difficulties with mental health. Most of these positions, again, require some sort of music degree, if not multiple music degrees. In the broadcast, film, or video game, see, look, there's a typo. What did I say? There's a typo. And I can't fix it. There we go. Woo. Okay. Again, this is an antiquated term, but disc jockey. There is still terrestrial radio. When we'll talk about terrestrial radio, that just basically means AM or FM radio. But people still spin, talk while they play recordings. So the two main, again, disc jockey, two main employment possibilities in broadcasting or in radio and terrestrial radio: disc jockey and program director, because somebody has to decide what they're going to play and what they're not going to play. TV broadcasting, composer of dramatic music. Again, this goes back to sort of the composing field. The underscore. Somebody writes. So again, let's talk about some iconic movie music. Somebody writes the theme, and sometimes that person writes all the music. So the music that sort of is the incidental music or the underscore. Like not everything is a theme. Sometimes it's just a minute or a few seconds of music to evoke a certain mood, right? That's written by somebody. Again, in this field of underscoring, there's an increasing use of the sorts of production music libraries that we spoke of earlier. But especially big projects want all original music, and they're not going to farm it out to a production library. So, these musicians are highly skilled and highly trained. Music supervisor is a quasi. It is not creative in the sense usually of writing music, but it is the person between, again, business and creative. This is the person who is licensing music. We will talk about this later in the semester about the role of licensing known music for use in broadcast possibilities. This becomes a thing. It's a huge deal now in video games and films, and the rise of television in the last 20 years since shows like The Wire and The Sopranos became a big deal. Well, television has become its own art form, and the way you attract, part of the way that you attract attention is by licensing big songs. So it's been a thing in movies for a while. We'll talk about later in the semester when we get into licensing and publishing and who gets paid and why they get paid and etc. A music supervisor is a huge deal in today's music business world, because what they try to do is find opportunities to blow up their project, make their project seem important by using music that either is big or has the potential to be big, and bringing their project and the music together, and how to do that and stay on budget, right? Which music will I license? Can I get an album tie-in? How do I market this? These don't necessarily have to be trained musicians. You do have to have a good knowledge of historical pop music, what the business calls catalog items. Catalog items have become a big deal since licensing became more of a thing in movies and television since the 80s. So you have to have a pretty wide swath of knowledge with regard to pop music, both old and new. Not necessarily, this is not the same as writing music. This is so you don't need a music degree for this. Music editor, music cutter, again, if you're having music in in some sort of television or movie or video, you need someone to make sure that the music is synced with the film. That's a job. Again, you don't need to be a trained musician. You need to be trained on the software of music editing. Music videos, again, I am a child of the 80s, and it was during this generation when a lot of opportunities that hadn't existed in previous generations became a thing. So one of them was music videos. With the rise of MTV in the early 80s, the video became a standard marketing tool and a way of creating buzz about a certain single. So it became its own industry, whereas before it had never been that. So music videos obviously are still a huge deal. Video game score, audio programmer. Video games have become more and more sophisticated to the point where they now, like films and television, will license famous songs to draw attention and to create buzz about their game. But there still has to be underscore and theme music, and somebody has to write or program that. Again, that's a huge deal. If you listen to, again, so many of us don't watch broadcast television anymore or really listen to the radio. However, if you watch YouTube, if you watch, again, live sports or whatever, you're going to catch commercials or jingles. Somebody has to write that music. These are generally skilled musicians, trained music-related careers. People write about music all the time. That's still a field. Again, you don't necessarily have to be a trained musician. Most, and I will say this as someone who is a trained musician, most people who write about music are not trained as musicians. Music librarian, if you have ever been to the Metropolitan Opera or the New York Philharmonic, these institutions have music librarians. Our school has a music library. We do not have a music librarian, but big schools do. Big, huge music schools like the Juilliard School or the Eastman School of Music, they have a music librarian whose job it is to look after that. Again, you don't have to be a trained musician. You have to be a trained librarian, but it is a music-related field. Sound engineer, technician, many of you are audio minors. You understand very well, again, we understand very well, since so much of our recorded music is manipulated or not done with live musicians at all. The field of what happens in the studio is more important than ever. Instrument design and maintenance. Again, let's go back to an example of how this is really important. If there are elementary schools, junior high schools, and this is only one swath of this, elementary schools, junior high schools, and high schools, colleges, all over the country with, at least pre-COVID, hopefully post-COVID, thriving instrumental music programs. Well, all those kids have instruments. A lot of times they're owned by the school district, but a lot of times kids' parents buy them instruments. All of those instruments need people to maintain and repair them, because I have a child and she plays an instrument, and kids will dent instruments, and somebody's got to take out the dents, right? There are also new instruments being built all the time. People are building new designs on saxophones and trumpets and trombones, and people are designing and building new instruments. So this is a field that, again, you don't have to be a trained musician, but it does take specific training to learn how to be an instrument designer or a maintenance person. Again, managerial, executive, sales, legal services. These are all really important executive positions in the music business that have crossover in multiple industries. Somebody's got to manage it. Somebody's got to sell it. Somebody's got to make sure that you're complying and everything is above board and legal. So these positions exist. Again, managerial, you don't need a specific training. Sales, you don't need specific training. Legal services, well, generally those people do need some sort of training. If you're not a lawyer, then you might be a copyright researcher or paralegal. Those people will need sort of on the job training. There's a tremendous amount of learning that has to take place on those jobs, because there's a lot of money at stake. Visual arts, graphics. Again, we spoke about the rise of the video as a as a as an industry within the music business in the 1980s. Well, long before that, you had people. I spoke about Elton John in the 1970s, uh, David Bowie in the 1970s, the Metropolitan Opera, all like Queen, Zeppelin, Pink Floyd. All of these bands or entities have huge costumes, props. All of this has to, and it has to be staged. It has to be costumed. Somebody has to sew and design and sew the costumes. Somebody has to build the sets and design the sets. All of these things have to happen before the artist ever steps on stage. These are jobs within the music industry. And again, entrepreneur. Somebody is one of the reasons I do not use a textbook in this class is because none of them are up to date. The music business changes so fast. It'll even change during the semester. I guarantee it. Which is why, again, I will give you readings to do sort of on the fly, because there's always the advent of a new business model, new legislation, new technology that is going to interrupt how business has gotten done thus far. All of these things, so entrepreneurs bring these new ideas to the table. And finally, here's a basic list of a larger list, again taken from a textbook of again what we've talked about up till now is not by no means an exhaustive list. This is a more exhaustive list, but still not total. I mean, there are as many different niches of employment and building a life in the industry as you can think of, and that's maybe the key. Is if it is a creative field, and if you think of it, you can find a way to be a part of it, or you can build it and build it up from. Again, nobody thought we will spend a fair amount of the semester talking about the advent of streaming. Well, 10 years ago, nobody even really knew what that was. Maybe slightly more than that, but most people, especially Americans, that this has only been in the last 10 or 15 years that streaming has become part of the conversation. But when I was a kid, it didn't exist. It's huge now. So it's an industry that does not suffer fools gladly, and we will see how, if in the music industry, if you're not thinking about what's current, you will get lost, and you will suffer major losses, financially or otherwise, or you would just go out of business if you're not willing to stay up to date. One of the things that we'll talk about, we just invoked Spotify and the idea of streaming. When music piracy became a thing in the last part of right around the millennium, the music industry was not ready for it, and it almost collapsed the music industry. So if you think that you can do something and you have a strong enough vision, you can make it happen, is sort of the overarching thing. So there you go. That's a bit of fluff for today. We'll start to get more in depth next week. We're going to ease into this semester, but I mean what I say. Like I said in the last lecture, make sure, if you haven't watched the videos on best study practices, do so. I will test you on them. Okay, so we will have our first quiz at the end of next week, the end of week 2. So good luck. Reach out to me if you need. And this PowerPoint presentation will be posted up on Blackboard for your perusal at your leisure. Okay, this video will stay up for a week after today, and then I will take it down. So if you feel like, again, this is a pretty light presentation, there's not a whole lot of note taking that you can't just get out of the PowerPoint. That won't be the case with some of the stuff that we do later in the semester. So that's it. If you have questions, reach out to me, and good luck.